The shotgun blast echoed across the open plains of Wyoming Territory as Virgil Morrison reloaded, watching the last of the rustlers disappear over the ridge. Their attempt to steal his prize cattle had been thwarted, but the encounter had left him weary and on edge. It was 1878, and the law in these parts was still whatever a man made it. As darkness fell over his modest ranch just outside Cheyenne, all Virgil wanted was to tend to his horses, check the property one last time, and fall into his bed for a dreamless sleep. The moon hung bright and full in the sky as Virgil made his way to the barn, lantern swinging in his calloused hand. At 32, he'd built his small spread from nothing, working himself to exhaustion each day since returning from the war. The solitude suited him, or so he'd convinced himself after losing his parents to fever 5 years prior. The night air carried the scent of sage and pine as he pushed open the heavy barn door, the familiar smell of hay and horses greeting him. He was halfway through his nightly routine when he heard a soft sound, almost imperceptible, coming from the hayloft above. His hand instinctively moved to the revolver at his hip. Rustlers sometimes worked in pairs. Perhaps one had circled back, thinking to exact revenge. Silently, Virgil set down the lantern and drew his Colt, making his way toward the ladder. Each rung creaked despite his care, announcing his ascent. When his head cleared the loft floor, what he saw in the dim light stopped him cold. It wasn't a rustler waiting to ambush him. There, curled up in his hay, was a woman. She was sound asleep, her body rising and falling with each breath. A traveling bag served as her pillow, and she'd wrapped herself in what appeared to be a thin, tattered shawl. Her dark hair spilled across the hay, and even in sleep, her face looked troubled. Virgil holstered his weapon and climbed fully into the loft, keeping his distance so as not to frighten her. "Madam," he said softly, then cleared his throat and tried again. "Madam." She startled awake, scrambling backward until her back hit the barn wall. Her eyes, wide with fear, darted around the loft before settling on him. "I mean you no harm," Virgil said, keeping his hands visible, "but you're sleeping in my hayloft." She said nothing, just watched him with the wariness of a cornered animal. She couldn't have been more than 25, but exhaustion had carved lines around her eyes and mouth. "The bedroom would be more comfortable," Virgil offered, surprising himself with the words. "I have a spare room in the house. It's clean with a proper bed." The woman's gaze flickered to the ladder, clearly calculating her chances of escape. "My name is Virgil Morrison," he continued. "This is my ranch. Whatever trouble you're in, you don't need to sleep in a barn." She swallowed hard, and when she spoke, her voice was hoarse. "How do I know I can trust you?" "You don't," Virgil admitted. "Just as I don't know I can trust you, but it's cold tonight and that shawl isn't much protection. I'm offering a room with a lock on the door, nothing more." Minutes passed as they regarded each other in silence. Finally, she gathered her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "My name is Penelope," she said, omitting a surname. "Penelope Nash," Virgil nodded, not pressing for more information. "Well, Miss Nash, my offer stands." "The house is just across the yard." She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Thank you." As they descended the ladder and walked across the moonlit yard, Virgil kept a respectful distance. The woman Penelope clutched her small bag to her chest, her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. She flinched at every sound. An owl's hoot, the distant howl of a coyote, the creaking of the windmill. Inside the modest house, Virgil lit a lamp and showed her to the small room at the end of the hall. It had belonged to his mother and still contained her simple furniture: a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a rocking chair by the window. "There's water in the pitcher," he said, gesturing to the washstand. "Bathrooms down the hall. Kitchen's yonder if you're hungry." And he pointed to the door. That lock works. Relief visibly washed over her face at the mention of the lock. Thank you, Mr. Morrison. Virgil, he corrected automatically. Get some rest, Miss Nash. We can talk in the morning if you're of a mind to. He turned to leave, then paused. You're safe here, he added, meeting her eyes directly. You have my word on that. After closing the door behind him, he heard the distinct click of the lock. Virgil stood there a moment, wondering what kind of trouble had brought this woman to his hayloft. Then, with a sigh, he retired to his own room, though sleep was long in coming. Morning arrived with the crow of his rooster and the first golden rays of sunlight. Virgil had been up for hours, tending to the animals and preparing a simple breakfast. He wasn't sure if his unexpected guest would still be there, or if she'd slipped away in the night. The smell of coffee and frying bacon eventually drew Penelope from her room. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking marginally better after a night in a real bed, though the wariness hadn't left her eyes. Good morning, Virgil said, keeping his tone neutral. Hungry, she nodded, and he gestured to the table. Please sit. Penelope took a seat, her posture stiff. She wore the same clothes as the previous night, a simple, dusty dress that had once been blue but had faded to a nondescript gray. Her hair was tied back, revealing a face that might have been pretty if not shadowed by exhaustion and worry. Virgil set a plate of eggs, bacon, and biscuits before her, along with a cup of strong coffee. He served himself and sat across from her, giving her space. Thank you, she said quietly, before eating with the careful restraint of someone who'd known hunger but didn't want to appear desperate. They ate in silence for a while before Virgil spoke. I don't mean to pry, Miss Nash, but I'm guessing you're running from something. Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. Or someone, she admitted. Virgil nodded, not surprised. Husband? No, she said quickly. Not a husband. The law. A bitter smile touched her lips. No, Mr. Morrison, I've broken no laws. Virgil, he reminded her. He took a sip of his coffee, considering. Look, you don't owe me your story, but if you're in danger, I should know what or who might come looking for you. Penelope set down her fork, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup as if drawing strength from its warmth. His name is Harlan Blackstone. He owns half the businesses in Denver, including the hotel where I worked as a maid. Her voice dropped. He's not a good man. Virgil knew the type all too well. Men who believed their money and power gave them rights to whatever and whoever they wanted. He hurt you. She didn't answer directly. I managed to get away before things got worse, but he's not the kind of man who accepts being denied. He'll be looking for me. Denver's a fair distance, Virgil observed. I've been traveling for over a week, mostly on foot, sometimes catching rides with farmers or freight wagons. She looked up at him. I didn't intend to trespass. Your barn seemed safe and I was so tired. Virgil nodded, understanding better than she knew. After the war, he'd spent months drifting, sleeping in barns and under stars before finally finding his way to this land. You need a place to stay while you figure things out, he said. It wasn't a question. The room is yours for as long as you need it. Surprise flickered across her face. Why would you help a stranger? Virgil considered the question. I've been on both sides, needing help and being able to give it. Right now, I'm in a position to help. That's all. She studied him as if searching for hidden motives. I can work, she finally said. I'm good at cleaning, cooking, mending. I won't be a burden. This place could use a woman's touch, Virgil agreed. Been just me for too long, I reckon. The ghost of a smile touched her lips. Thank you, Virgil. Don't thank me yet, he replied, rising to refill their coffee cups. Ranch work starts at dawn and doesn't much care if you're tired or sore. I'm not afraid of hard work, she said with quiet dignity. No, Virgil agreed, looking at her calloused hands. I don't imagine you are. Over the next few days, Penelope proved her worth around the ranch. She cleaned the house from top to bottom, turning what had been merely functional living quarters into something approaching a home. The windows gleamed, the floors shone, and meals became events rather than necessary interruptions to the day's work. Virgil found himself looking forward to coming in from the fields, drawn by the smells of fresh bread or stew simmering on the stove. Penelope kept her distance, maintaining a polite formality, but gradually her shoulders began to lose some of their tension. She still startled at unexpected sounds and rarely ventured beyond the immediate vicinity of the house, but the haunted look in her eyes began to fade. A week after her arrival, Virgil returned from town with supplies and a package wrapped in brown paper. "For you," he said gruffly, setting it on the table. Penelope looked at it warily. "What is it? Open it and see." She carefully unwrapped the package to reveal fabric several yards of serviceable cotton in a warm chestnut color. "Noticed your dress is wearing thin," Virgil explained, suddenly feeling awkward. "Thought you might want something new." Penelope touched the fabric with reverent fingers. "This is very generous." "It's practical," he corrected. "Can't have you freezing come winter." The implication that she would still be there when winter arrived hung in the air between them. "Thank you," she said simply, but the smile she gave him was genuine, the first he'd seen. That night, after supper, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in shades of gold and crimson. It had become a ritual of sorts, these quiet moments as the day faded. "My father had a small farm in Missouri," Penelope said suddenly, breaking their companionable silence. "We lost it after he died in '65, sharpshooter at Vicksburg." Virgil tensed. "I was at Vicksburg, Union side." She glanced at him, then back at the sunset. "My father wore gray." "War's been over a long time," Virgil said quietly. "Not for everyone." Virgil nodded, understanding her meaning. "Some wounds ran deeper than bullets and blades. Your mother died when I was 16. Consumption." Penelope's hands twisted in her lap. "I went to live with my aunt in Kansas City, but she couldn't really afford another mouth to feed. When I turned 18, I headed west. Heard there were opportunities in Denver." A bitter smile crossed her face. "There were opportunities, all right, just not the kind a decent woman wants. And Blackstone, owner of the Queen City Hotel, started noticing me about 6 months ago. Gifts appeared in my quarters. Extra money in my pay, I refused them all." She stared into the gathering darkness. He wasn't used to being refused. Virgil waited, sensing there was more. "One night he cornered me in a linen closet, said I'd been leading him on, that I owed him." Her voice grew distant. "I hit him with a broom handle and ran. Didn't stop until I was on a freight wagon heading north. I knew he'd send men after me. He's not the kind to let an insult pass. You think he's still looking? Men like Harlan Blackstone don't forget." She turned to look at him directly. "I should move on. I'm putting you at risk by staying." "This is Wyoming Territory, not Colorado," Virgil pointed out. "Blackstone may have influence in Denver, but out here, a man's property is his own." He held her gaze. "You're safe, Penelope. You can stay as long as you want." The use of her given name hung between them, intimate in the gathering dusk. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." The days grew longer and warmer as spring melted into summer. Penelope's presence transformed not only the house but the entire rhythm of the ranch. The vegetable garden that had gone untended for years now flourished under her care. Chickens that had previously been kept only for eggs now provided meat for Sunday dinners. She even took over care of the milk cow, declaring that Virgil's technique was frightening the poor creature half to death. For his part, Virgil found himself taking more care with his appearance, shaving daily and keeping his clothes mended. He built her a proper clothesline, a bench for the porch, shelves for the kitchen. Small comforts that made the house feel more permanent, more like a home. They fell into an easy partnership, their initial wariness giving way to mutual respect and, gradually, friendship. In the evenings, Virgil would sometimes read aloud from one of the books his mother had left behind, while Penelope mended or sewed. Other times, they simply talked about the day's work, about their childhoods, about the future. Virgil learned that Penelope had a quick mind and strong opinions. She'd been educated at a ladies' academy before her father's death cut her schooling short. She loved poetry and could recite Tennyson and Longfellow from memory. She hated injustice and had once been thrown out of a Denver church for defending a Chinese laundress who was being harassed by the deacon. In turn, Penelope discovered that beneath Virgil's taciturn exterior lay a thoughtful man who had seen too much of the world's cruelty, but hadn't surrendered to cynicism. He'd fought in the war out of duty rather than conviction, and carried guilt for surviving when so many hadn't. He loved his land with a fierce devotion and treated his animals with gentle respect. And though he rarely spoke of it, she sensed a deep loneliness in him that mirrored her own. One hot July afternoon, Virgil returned from checking fence lines to find the house empty. Panic seized him until he spotted her down by the creek that ran along the eastern edge of his property. She was knee-deep in the water, her skirts hiked up and secured at her waist, revealing slim calves that had grown tanned from working outdoors. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. She was so focused on her task, catching something in the water with cupped hands, that she didn't notice him until he was at the bank. "Dinner walking away from you," he called. Penelope looked up, laughing, water droplets glistening in her hair. "Not dinner. Look." She waded carefully toward him, hands cradled together. When she reached the bank, she opened her palms to reveal a tiny frog, emerald green and no bigger than a thimble. "Isn't he beautiful?" she asked, eyes shining with childlike delight. Virgil found himself captivated not by the frog but by her face flushed with heat and joy, more alive than he'd ever seen it. "Beautiful," he agreed, not specifying what he meant. Their eyes met, and something shifted between them, a current stronger than the creek's gentle flow. Then the frog leaped from her hands, breaking the moment, and they both laughed. "You're soaked," Virgil observed as she climbed out of the creek. "It feels wonderful in this heat," she replied, wringing water from her skirt. "You should try it." "Maybe I will," he said, surprising himself. He hadn't swum in the creek since he was a much younger man. "After supper, when the day cools some." "I'll hold you to that," she warned, her eyes twinkling with mischief. True to his word, as the evening shadows lengthened, Virgil found himself back at the creek. Penelope had changed into her new dress, the chestnut fabric complementing her sun-kissed skin. Her hair, usually pinned severely back, hung in a loose braid down her back. Virgil removed his boots and rolled up his trousers, feeling oddly self-conscious. It had been years since he'd done anything purely for pleasure. "The water's perfect," Penelope called, already wading in. "Come on." The creek was cool but not cold, a blessed relief after the heat of the day. They splashed like children, laughing as they sent water arcing through the air. When Penelope slipped on a mossy stone, Virgil caught her instinctively, his hands firm on her waist. Time suspended as they stood there, her hands on his shoulders, his at her waist, the water flowing around them. Her eyes, a deep brown he'd never properly appreciated before, widened slightly. Her lips parted on a breath. Virgil knew he should release her, step back, maintain the careful boundaries they'd established. Instead, he found himself drawing her closer. "Penelope," he murmured, her name a question. She answered by rising on tiptoe and pressing her lips to his. The kiss was gentle, tentative. attesting of waters deeper and more dangerous than any creek. Virgil responded with equal gentleness, afraid of frightening her, afraid of the feelings surging through him. When they parted, Penelope's eyes were full of wonder and something like fear. "I shouldn't have done that," she whispered. "Do you regret it?" Virgil asked, his heart hammering against his ribs. She shook her head slowly. "No, but I'm afraid. Of me," the thought pained him. "Of this, of wanting something I might lose." Her fingers tightened on his shoulders. "I can't go through that again, Virgil. I can't allow myself to need someone only to have them taken away." Virgil understood. Loss had been the defining constant of both their lives. "I'm not going anywhere, Penelope, and neither are you unless you choose to." She searched his face, looking for reassurance or perhaps a reason to pull away. Whatever she saw seemed to satisfy her, for she relaxed in his arms. "Then maybe," she said softly, "we can be afraid together." Their return to the house was marked by a new awareness of each other. Simple actions, passing the salt at dinner, brushing hands while washing dishes, saying good night at her bedroom door, now carried the weight of possibility. Neither rushed to define what was happening between them. Both had been hurt enough to approach happiness with caution. But as July gave way to August, their relationship deepened. Virgil found reasons to touch her hand at the small of her back, fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face. Penelope grew bolder in her affections, greeting him with a kiss when he returned from the fields, sitting close enough on the porch that their shoulders touched. Late one afternoon, as thunderclouds gathered on the horizon, promising relief from the heat, a rider approached the ranch. Virgil was mending tack in the barn, and Penelope was hanging laundry when they both spotted the dust cloud on the road. Penelope froze, the sheet in her hands billowing in the wind. "Get inside," Virgil said, his hand moving to the revolver he always wore. "Lock the door." She hesitated. "Virgil, now, Penelope, please." She nodded and hurried to the house, casting fearful glances over her shoulder. Virgil waited in the yard, watching as the rider came into view. It was Sheriff Tom Randolph from Cheyenne, a fair man Virgil had known for years. Relief washed over him, followed immediately by concern. Sheriffs didn't ride out to isolated ranches for social calls. "Afternoon, Tom," Virgil called as the lawman reined in his horse. "Virgil," the sheriff nodded, dismounting stiffly. He was a lean, weathered man in his 50s, with sharp eyes that missed little. "Been a while." "What brings you all the way out here?" The sheriff removed his hat, wiping sweat from his brow. "Mind if we get out of this heat? Storm's brewing and my old bones can feel it coming." Virgil hesitated, thinking of Penelope hiding inside. "Sure," he said finally. "Come on in." As they approached the house, the door opened and Penelope appeared, her face composed but her eyes wary. "Miss Nash," Virgil said formally, "this is Sheriff Randolph from Cheyenne." The sheriff's eyebrows rose slightly at the presence of a woman, but he tipped his hat politely. "Madam." "Sheriff," Penelope acknowledged, stepping aside to let them enter. "Can I offer you coffee or perhaps something cold? There's lemonade." "Lemonade would be much appreciated, thank you." Once they were settled at the kitchen table, glasses of lemonade before them, Sheriff Randall got to the point. "Had some men in town asking questions," he said, his eyes moving between Virgil and Penelope. "3 of them, well-dressed, not the usual type we get through Cheyenne. Said they were looking for a woman matching your description, Miss Nash." Penelope's hand trembled as she set down her glass. "Did they say why they were looking for this woman?" Claimed she stole jewelry from their employer in Denver. "Valuable pieces." The sheriff's gaze was neutral. "They had a poster with your likeness, offering a sizable reward." "I stole nothing," Penelope said firmly, though her voice shook slightly. "Those men work for Harlan Blackstone. He's using false accusations to force my return. Sheriff Randall nodded slowly. Thought it might be something like that. These men didn't strike me as law officers, and their story had holes. He took a long drink of lemonade. I told them I hadn't seen anyone matching your description, suggested they try up north in Sheridan. Relief washed over Penelope's face. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, the sheriff warned. They're determined men, and they might not take my word for it. One of them, big fellow with a scar through his eyebrow, mentioned checking all the outlying ranches. Virgil's jaw tightened. When was this? Yesterday afternoon. Sheriff Randall looked at him seriously. They could be here any time. She stays, Virgil said firmly. This is my land and she's under my protection, the sheriff sighed. Thought you might say that. He reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a folded paper, which is why I brought this. He pushed the paper across the table. Virgil unfolded it to find a marriage license, already bearing the sheriff's signature as witness, requiring only their names and signatures to be complete. Tom. What? A woman traveling alone, staying with an unmarried man, that's grounds enough for these types to cause trouble, claiming impropriety or worse, Sheriff Randall explained. But a wife staying with her husband, that's a different matter entirely. Penelope stared at the document, her face unreadable. You're suggesting we lie. I'm suggesting you protect yourselves legally, the sheriff corrected. From what I've observed, there are worse fates than being married to Virgil here. Virgil looked at Penelope, careful to keep his expression neutral. It would be on paper only, he assured her. Nothing need change between us. A complicated emotion flickered across her face. And if these men come, you'll be Mrs. Morrison beyond Blackstone's reach, Virgil said. Once they're gone, if you wish to move on, we can figure something out. Penelope was silent for a long moment, her eyes on the document. Finally, she looked up at Virgil. And if I don't wish to move on, the question hung in the air, laden with meaning. Then you'd stay, Virgil said simply. As my wife in truth, not just on paper, if that's what you want. Sheriff Randall cleared his throat. Perhaps I should step outside for a moment. No, Penelope said, her decision made. Stay, please, we'll need a witness. She picked up the pen the sheriff had provided and signed her name in a neat, flowing script. Virgil took the pen from her, their fingers brushing. Are you sure, Penelope? She met his eyes steadily. I've never been more sure of anything. He signed his name beside hers. And just like that, they were married. The sheriff performed a brief ceremony to make it official, then stayed only long enough to finish his lemonade and offer his congratulations before riding back toward town. I'll let folks know you've been married a while, he said as he mounted his horse. Make it harder for those men to cause trouble. He tipped his hat. Mrs. Morrison. The name startled Penelope, but she managed a smile. Thank you, Sheriff. After he'd gone, Virgil and Penelope stood in awkward silence on the porch, the storm clouds building dramatically on the horizon, mirroring the tension in the air. I meant what I said, Virgil finally spoke. Nothing has to change. The spare room is still yours. Penelope turned to face him, her expression resolute. I don't want the spare room, she said quietly. I want to be your wife, Virgil, in every way. He stepped closer, cupping her face in his calloused hands. I never thought to marry again after Mary died, he admitted. Never thought I'd find someone who made me feel like living instead of just surviving. And now, Penelope whispered, now I can't imagine my life without you in it. He brushed his thumb across her cheek. I love you, Penelope. Have for a while now. Tears glistened in her eyes. I love you too. I was just afraid to say it. Their kiss was different from the tentative explorations of before, deeper, more certain, sealed with promises neither had dared hope for. The first fat raindrops began to fall as they made their way inside, husband and wife in truth now. not just on paper. The house that had become a home now became a sanctuary, sheltering their newfound joy as the storm broke overhead. Hours later, as rain lashed the windows and thunder rolled across the plains, they lay in each other's arms, marveling at how fate had brought them together. "You believe in Providence?" Penelope asked, her head resting on Virgil's chest. "Never used to," he admitted, stroking her hair. "But what else would you call a woman appearing in my hayloft, just when I'd convinced myself I was meant to be alone?" She smiled in the darkness. "What would you have done if I'd refused to come to the house that night?" "Probably brought you blankets and slept in the stall below to make sure you were safe," Virgil chuckled. "I'm stubborn that way." "I'm glad you found me," she whispered. "I'm glad you let yourself be found," he replied, kissing the top of her head. They drifted to sleep as the storm raged on, secure in each other's arms, neither knowing that their newfound happiness would soon be tested. 2 days later, the men Sheriff Randall had warned them about arrived. Virgil spotted them approaching from the north field and hurried back to the house. "They're coming," he told Penelope, who was kneading bread dough. "3 riders, just like Tom said." She wiped her hands on her apron, her face pale but determined. "What do? We stick to the plan. You're my wife, have been for months." Virgil checked his revolver, then tucked it back in its holster. "Stay calm, but stay close to me." Penelope nodded, removing her apron and smoothing her hair. She wore her wedding ring, his mother's simple gold band, on her left hand, and Virgil had found his father's ring for himself. Small details to reinforce their story. They waited on the porch, Virgil's arm around Penelope's waist, presenting the picture of a contented married couple greeting unexpected visitors. The 3 men reined in their horses in the yard. The leader was exactly as Sheriff Randall had described, a big man with a scar through his eyebrow, wearing city clothes that had seen better days after weeks on the trail. "Afternoon," Virgil called, keeping his tone neutral. "Something I can help you gentlemen with." The scarred man dismounted, while his companions, one lean and wiry, the other stocky with a bushy mustache, remained on horseback. "Hope so," the leader said, approaching the porch. His eyes lingered on Penelope, who stiffened beside Virgil. "We're looking for someone." "Young woman, dark hair, about 5'4". Might have come through these parts in the last few months." "What's she done?" Virgil asked, as if merely curious. "Stole some valuable jewelry from our employer in Denver," the man replied smoothly. "Mr. Blackstone is offering a substantial reward for her return." "Haven't seen anyone like that," Virgil said. "Just been me and the missus here since spring." He squeezed Penelope's waist gently. "Ain't that right, darling?" "That's right," Penelope confirmed, her voice steady despite the fear Virgil could feel in her rigid posture. "We don't get many visitors out here." The scarred man's eyes narrowed, studying Penelope with uncomfortable intensity. "You look familiar, madam." "I don't believe we've met," Penelope replied coolly. "I've never been to Denver." "Show them the picture, Fletcher," the wiry man called from horseback. Fletcher reached into his coat and withdrew a wanted poster, unfolding it to reveal a crude sketch of a woman who certainly resembled Penelope. Beneath the words "wanted for theft" and the promise of a $200 reward. "Resemblance is striking," Fletcher said, holding up the poster. "I suppose," Virgil agreed calmly, "but my wife's been here since last October. We were married in November." He gestured to the rings on their fingers. "When did this theft supposedly occur?" "April," Fletcher said, watching their reactions closely. "Well, there you have it," Virgil shrugged. "Couldn't have been my penny. We were snowed in half of March and April, couldn't get to town for supplies, let alone all the way to Denver and back." Fletcher didn't look convinced. "Mind if we have a look around, just to be thorough?" "Actually, "I do mind," Virgil said, his tone hardening. "This is private property. Unless you have a warrant, you've no right to search my home." The tension in the air thickened. Fletcher's hand twitched near his hip, where a pistol was holstered. "Mr. Blackstone doesn't take kindly to obstacles," he warned. "And I don't take kindly to men threatening my wife on my own property," Virgil replied evenly. His hand rested casually near his own revolver. "Now, I've answered your questions. I suggest you move on before the weather turns. Looks like rain coming." Fletcher stared at them a moment longer, then folded the poster and returned it to his pocket. "If you happen to see this woman, Mr. Blackstone's reward is genuine. $200 is a lot of money for a small-time rancher." "We're doing just fine," Virgil said, meeting the man's gaze without flinching. "Good day to you." Fletcher tipped his hat mockingly, his eyes still on Penelope. "Madam." The three men mounted up and rode slowly away, looking back several times before disappearing over the ridge. Only when they were well out of sight did Penelope sag against Virgil, her legs nearly giving way beneath her. He guided her into the house, helping her to a chair at the kitchen table. "They'll be back," she whispered, her hands shaking as she pressed them flat against the tabletop. Fletcher wasn't fooled. "Maybe not," Virgil agreed grimly. "But they can't prove anything, and without proof they can't take you." "You don't know Harlan Blackstone," Penelope said, her eyes haunted. "He doesn't need proof. He doesn't even need the law. If money doesn't work, he'll use force." Virgil knelt before her, taking her trembling hands in his. "Listen to me, Penelope. I won't let anyone take you from me. Not Blackstone, not his men, not anyone. You're my wife now in the eyes of God and the law. I'm afraid," she admitted, "not just for myself, but for you." "These men are dangerous, Virgil. If they hurt you because of me, I've faced worse," he interrupted gently. "And I've never had more reason to fight." He squeezed her hands. "We'll get through this together." She nodded, drawing strength from his certainty. "What do we do now?" "We live our lives," Virgil said simply. "We don't cower or hide, but we stay alert." He rose to his feet. "And I'm going to let a few neighbors know we might have trouble coming. Folks out here look after their own." Over the next few days, they maintained a careful vigilance. Virgil rode to the nearest neighboring ranches, explaining the situation without revealing Penelope's connection to Blackstone. The other ranchers, long-time residents who had little patience for city men throwing their weight around, promised to keep watch and send word if they spotted the strangers again. Despite the looming threat, Penelope refused to let fear dictate their lives. She continued her work around the ranch with renewed purpose, as if determined to claim this life as truly hers. At night, in the sanctuary of their bedroom, she and Virgil found solace in each other, their love deepening in the face of adversity. A week passed with no sign of Fletcher and his companions. Then 2 weeks. August waned, bringing cooler nights and the first hints of fall. "Perhaps they've given up," Penelope suggested one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. "Gone back to Denver empty-handed." Virgil wished he could believe it. "Perhaps," he said, not wanting to dampen her cautious optimism. That night, they were awakened by the frantic barking of their dog, Rex. Virgil was instantly alert, reaching for the shotgun he kept beside the bed. "Stay here," he told Penelope, pulling on his trousers. "Lock the door behind me." She caught his arm. "Virgil, no, I'll be careful," he promised, kissing her quickly. "Just stay inside, away from the windows." The dog's barking had taken on a desperate quality. Virgil moved silently through the house, checking each window as he went. Nothing seemed amiss until he reached the kitchen and saw the glow of flames coming from the direction of the barn. "Damnation," he muttered, hurrying to the back door. Outside, the barn was fully engulfed, flames leaping into the night sky. The horses were screaming in terror. Virgil ran toward the inferno, Rex at his heels. He could hear the frantic movements of the horses inside. Without hesitation, he kicked open the smaller side door and plunged into the smoke-filled interior. The heat was intense, the smoke choking. Virgil made his way to the stalls, releasing the panicked animals who bolted for the open door. He was reaching for the last stall when a burning beam crashed down behind him, blocking his path back to the exit. Coughing violently, eyes streaming from the smoke, Virgil looked desperately for another way out. The main doors were across the barn floor, now a sea of flames. The hayloft ladder was ablaze. He was considering making a dash through the fire when a voice stopped him cold. "Shame about the barn," Fletcher called from somewhere outside. "Beautiful horses, though. Be a real tragedy if they burned alive." Virgil's blood ran cold. This was no accident. "Nothing to say, Morrison," Fletcher taunted. "Maybe your pretty wife will be more talkative." Galvanized by fear for Penelope, Virgil wrapped his shirt around his face and charged toward the main doors, heedless of the flames. He burst through into the cooler night air, rolling to extinguish the smoldering patches on his clothes. Fletcher stood 20 yards away, pistol drawn and aimed at Virgil's chest. His two companions emerged from the shadows, similarly armed. "Where's the woman?" Fletcher demanded. Virgil rose slowly to his feet, acutely aware that his own weapon was back in the house. "Safe from you," he growled. Fletcher's scarred face twisted in a cruel smile. "Not for long. Boys, check the house." "Touch my wife and I'll kill you," Virgil warned, his voice deadly calm despite the rage building inside him. "Your wife," Fletcher laughed. "That's rich. We know who she is, Morrison. Penny Nash, chambermaid from the Queen City Hotel, Mr. Blackstone's property." "No woman is any man's property," Virgil countered. "And her name is Penelope Morrison now." The wiry man and his mustachioed companion had started toward the house when a shot rang out. The wiry man yelped, clutching his arm as blood blossomed on his sleeve. All heads turned toward the house, where Penelope stood on the porch, Virgil's revolver steady in her hands. "The next one won't be a warning," she called, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. Fletcher's face darkened with anger. "You little—" He swung his pistol toward Penelope. Virgil didn't think, he reacted. He launched himself at Fletcher, tackling the larger man to the ground. They grappled in the dirt, each fighting for control of Fletcher's weapon. Virgil was fueled by desperate fear for Penelope, but Fletcher had the advantage of size and position. The gun went off, the report deafening at such close range. Virgil felt a burning sensation along his side but kept fighting. He managed to slam Fletcher's hand against a rock, forcing him to drop the pistol. Meanwhile, Penelope had engaged in a tense standoff with the remaining men. The wounded one had retreated, but the mustachioed man was attempting to circle around to flank her. "Stay back," she warned, adjusting her aim to keep him in sight. The sound of galloping hooves momentarily distracted everyone. 3 riders appeared, rifles raised Virgil's neighbors, alerted by the fire and gunshots. "What in tarnation is going on here?" demanded Elijah Cooper, the nearest neighbor, his rifle trained on Fletcher and Virgil. "These men set fire to my barn," Virgil grunted, still pinning Fletcher to the ground. "Came to abduct my wife." Fletcher struggled beneath him. "She's a thief, wanted in Denver. She's a liar and a whore," the mustachioed man added viciously. Cooper's weathered face hardened. "That true, Mrs. Morrison?" "No," Penelope replied firmly. "These men work for Harlan Blackstone, a man who couldn't accept rejection. When I refused his advances and left Denver, he sent them to bring me back by any means necessary." Cooper exchanged glances with his companions, then nodded decisively. Morrison, let him up, slowly now. Virgil reluctantly released Fletcher, who scrambled to his feet, glaring murderously. You're making a mistake, Fletcher snarled at Cooper. There's money in this for anyone who helps us bring her in. We don't sell women around these parts, Cooper said coldly. And we take a dim view of men who burn down honest folks' barns. He gestured with his rifle. Mount up, all three of you. You're going to have a little chat with Sheriff Randall in Cheyenne. You can't, Fletcher began. We can and we will, interrupted one of Cooper's companions, a burly man named Jenkins. Unless you'd prefer we handle this ourselves, frontier style. The threat hung in the air, unmistakable. After a moment of tense silence, Fletcher and his men slowly complied, mounting their horses under the unwavering aim of the neighbors' rifles. We'll be back, Morrison, Fletcher called as they prepared to ride out. Mr. Blackstone doesn't forget. Neither do I, Virgil replied evenly. Tell your boss that if he sends anyone else after my wife, they won't be riding back to tell the tale. Cooper and his men escorted Fletcher's group toward town, leaving Virgil and Penelope standing in the yard, the burning barn casting a hellish glow over everything. You're hurt, Penelope gasped, noticing the blood staining Virgil's shirt. Just grazed, he assured her, though the wound was starting to throb painfully. What about you? Are you all right? She nodded, still clutching the revolver. I was so afraid for you, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. When I saw the barn burning, heard the shots. Virgil pulled her into his arms, heedless of his injury. It's over now, he murmured into her hair. They won't come back, not after Sheriff Randall gets through with them. But the barn, your horses, buildings can be rebuilt, Virgil said firmly. The horses got out, thanks to Rex's warning. Everything that matters is still here. He drew back to look into her eyes. You're all that matters, Penelope. The fire burned through the night, consuming the barn despite their efforts to contain it. By dawn, all that remained was a smoldering skeleton of charred beams. The horses, nervous but unharmed, had been corralled in the paddock. Virgil and Penelope, exhausted and soot-stained, sat on the porch steps watching the sunrise. We'll start rebuilding tomorrow, Virgil said, his arm around Penelope's shoulders. Cooper and the others will help. She leaned against him, careful of his bandaged wound. I'm sorry, Virgil. All of this happened because of me. No, he said firmly. It happened because of Blackstone's arrogance and cruelty. None of it is your fault. Penelope was quiet for a moment. Do you think it's really over? Will he give up? Virgil considered the question honestly. I don't know, he admitted. Men like Blackstone aren't used to losing, but he's in Denver and we're here. And now everyone for miles around knows our situation. He'd be a fool to try again. And if he does, then we'll face it together, Virgil said simply, like we've faced everything else. She nodded, drawing strength from his certainty. Together. 3 days later, Sheriff Randall rode out to the ranch with news. Fletcher and his men had been charged with arson and attempted abduction. They would stand trial in Cheyenne, facing several years in the territorial prison if convicted. What about Blackstone? Penelope asked, pouring coffee for the sheriff. Denies any involvement, of course, Randall replied grimly. Claims they were acting on their own, hoping to collect the reward he offered for the return of stolen property. He shook his head. Can't touch him directly without proof, but I've sent wires to the Denver authorities. They'll be watching him more closely now. Thank you, Tom, Virgil said sincerely. For everything. The sheriff nodded, his eyes kind as they rested on Penelope. You picked a good man, Mrs. Morrison. Stubborn as a mule, but good-hearted. I know, she smiled, reaching for Virgil's hand. Life gradually returned to normal, or rather, to a new normal that included both challenges and unexpected joys. The barn was rebuilt before the first snow, thanks to the help of neighbors and friends who turned the work into a community event, complete with a feast prepared by Penelope that earned her reputation as one of the finest cooks in the county. As winter settled over the Wyoming plains, Virgil and Penelope found themselves cocooned in their home, the outside world held at bay by snow and distance. They rode together by lamplight, planned improvements for the ranch in spring, and loved each other with a depth neither had thought possible. One snowy December evening, as they sat before the fire, Penelope set aside her sewing with unusual solemnity. "Virgil," she said, "there's something I need to tell you." He looked up from his book, instantly alert to the seriousness in her tone. "What is it?" She took a deep breath, her hands clasped in her lap. "I'm with child." The words hung in the air between them, monumental in their simplicity. "A baby," Virgil whispered, his book forgotten. "You're sure?" Penelope nodded, watching his face anxiously. "Doctor Wilson confirmed it when we were in town yesterday. I wanted to be certain before I told you." Virgil stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face, not the reserved smile she was accustomed to, but a broad grin that transformed his features. "A baby," he repeated, his voice filled with wonder. He moved to kneel before her, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." "You're happy then?" Penelope asked, though his reaction had already answered her question. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," Virgil said, looking up at her with eyes that shone with emotion. "I never thought. After Mary died, I never imagined I'd have a family again." He shook his head in amazement. "When will the little one arrive, Doctor?" "Wilson thinks June," she replied, covering his hand with hers. "A summer baby." Virgil laughed, a sound of pure joy. Perfect timing, after spring planting but before the fall harvest. He kissed her, tenderly at first, then with growing passion. "I love you, Penelope Morrison. You've given me back my life, and now you're giving me a future." "Our future," she corrected, smiling through tears of happiness. "Together." The months that followed were filled with preparations. Virgil converted the small room next to theirs into a nursery, crafting a cradle from pine with his own hands. Penelope sewed tiny garments and quilts, humming as she worked. Their home, already transformed by their love, now vibrated with anticipation for the new life that would soon join them. Spring came early that year, bringing fresh green to the plains and a roundness to Penelope's figure that Virgil found endlessly fascinating. "You're staring again," she chided one April morning as she kneaded bread dough, her swollen belly preceding her wherever she went. "Can't help it," Virgil admitted, not looking away. "You're beautiful." Penelope snorted, blowing a strand of hair from her flushed face. "I'm as big as a barn and awkward as a newborn colt." "Beautiful," Virgil insisted, coming to wrap his arms around her from behind, his hands cradling her belly. As if in response, the baby kicked against his palm. "See, he agrees with me." Penelope corrected with a smile. "It's a girl, I'm certain of it." Their good-natured argument about the baby's gender had become a daily ritual, neither truly caring as long as the child was healthy. In early June, just as the wildflowers were painting the plains in a riot of colors, Penelope's labor began. Virgil rode like the wind to fetch the midwife from town, returning to find Penelope pacing the bedroom, her face serene despite the pain he knew she must be feeling. "Don't look so terrified," she told him, pausing to breathe through a contraction. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time." The midwife, Mrs. Hollister, chuckled as she arranged her supplies. "Your wife has the right of it, Mr. Morrison. Now make yourself useful and boil some water." Virgil found himself banished to the kitchen, then to the porch as Penelope's labor progressed. The hours stretched endlessly, the sun climbing to its zenith and then beginning its descent. From inside, he could hear the midwife's calm instructions and occasionally Penelope's muffled cries. Just as twilight was settling over the land, a new sound split the air, the indignant wail of a newborn taking its first breath. Virgil was on his feet instantly, rushing to the bedroom door. Mrs. Hollister opened it before he could knock, her lined face creased in a broad smile. "Congratulations, Mr. Morrison. You have a fine son." Virgil entered the room in a daze. Penelope lay propped against pillows, her hair damp with sweat but her face radiant. In her arms was a small bundle wrapped in the special blanket she had embroidered during the long winter evenings. "Virgil," she said softly, "come meet your son." He approached the bed as if in a dream, sinking down beside her. When she tilted the bundle toward him, he found himself looking into a tiny red face, eyes squeezed shut, mouth working in what might have been a yawn. "He's perfect," Virgil whispered, reaching out a tentative finger to touch the downy head. "Look at all that hair." "Your hair," Penelope smiled, for indeed the baby had a thatch of dark hair like his father's. "I was wrong. It's not a girl." "Next time," Virgil said without thinking, then flushed. "I mean if you want someday," Penelope laughed, the sound tired but genuinely happy. "Next time," she agreed. "But perhaps we could enjoy this one for a while first," after Mrs. Hollister had departed, promising to return the next day to check on mother and child. Virgil stretched out beside Penelope on the bed, the baby nestled between them. "What shall we call him?" Penelope asked, gently stroking the infant's cheek. "I was thinking Thomas," Virgil suggested. "After the sheriff, if not for him bringing that marriage license that day." "Thomas," Penelope repeated, testing the name. "Thomas James Morrison, James for my father." "It's a good name," Virgil agreed. "A strong name." He leaned over to kiss first his son's forehead, then his wife's lips. "Thank you," he whispered against her skin. "For what? For finding your way to my hayloft that night, for trusting me, for loving me, for him." Virgil's voice cracked with emotion. "For everything." Penelope's eyes shimmered with tears of her own. "I should be thanking you," she said. "You saved me, Virgil. In every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," he corrected gently. Thomas chose that moment to scrunch up his face and let out a lusty cry, as if objecting to being left out of the conversation. They both laughed, the simple joy of the moment washing away the memory of all they had endured to reach this point. Outside, the stars emerged one by one, pinpricks of light in the vast Wyoming sky. Inside, in the warm circle of lamplight, a family that had begun with a chance encounter in a hayloft embarked on their future together. Over the years that followed, the Morrison ranch prospered. Virgil expanded his herd and his acreage, becoming known throughout the territory as a fair dealer and a good neighbor. Penelope, no longer the frightened woman who had fled Denver, grew into her role as rancher's wife, mother, and respected member of the community. Thomas was joined by a sister, Eleanor Mary, 2 years later, and then by another brother, William, 3 years after that. The house expanded along with the family, with Virgil adding rooms and a larger kitchen to accommodate their growing brood. They never heard directly from Harlan Blackstone again, though news occasionally reached them from Denver. The Queen City Hotel had burned down in a mysterious fire in 1882, and though nothing was proven, rumors persisted that Blackstone had arranged it for the insurance money. In 1885, he was indicted for fraud and died in prison 2 years later, a broken man whose empire had crumbled beneath the weight of his own corruption. On a warm summer evening in 1888, 10 years after Penelope had first sought shelter in Virgil's barn, They sat on their expanded porch watching their children play in the yard. Thomas, now a sturdy 9-year-old with his father's serious demeanor and his mother's quick mind, was teaching 5-year-old William how to throw a lasso. Eleanor, 7 and fiercely independent, was absorbed in a book, her dark hair falling across her face in a way that reminded Virgil powerfully of Penelope when they'd first met. "Happy?" Virgil asked, taking his wife's hand in his. It was a question he still asked regularly, needing to reassure himself that the life they'd built was real and not some dream he might wake from. "Completely," Penelope replied, squeezing his fingers. At 35, she was more beautiful to him than ever, the years having added character to her face without diminishing its warmth. "And you, more than I ever thought possible," Virgil admitted. At 42, his hair was threaded with silver at the temples, and the lines around his eyes had deepened. But he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had found his place in the world. They sat in companionable silence, watching the golden light of evening spread across their land. The new barn, larger and sturdier than its predecessor, cast a long shadow. Beyond it, cattle grazed peacefully and horses dozed in the paddock. The vegetable garden Penelope had planted that first summer now fed not only their family, but provided surplus for neighbors and the town market. "You ever think about it?" Penelope asked suddenly. "How different our lives might have been if I hadn't chosen your barn that night? If you hadn't found me?" Virgil considered the question, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But then I look at you, at the children, at everything we've built, and I can't imagine any other path." "Nor can I," Penelope said softly. "It's strange to think that the worst night of my life running from Blackstone, terrified and alone, led me to the best years I could have hoped for." "Life has a way of surprising us," Virgil agreed. "Though I still maintain that finding a woman sleeping in my hayloft was the most welcome surprise I've ever had." He grinned at her. "Even if you did look like a half-drowned cat at the time," Penelope laughed, swatting his arm playfully. "And you looked like a grumpy bear disturbed from hibernation." Their gentle teasing was interrupted by a commotion in the yard as William finally succeeded in looping his small lasso around a fence post, prompting cheers from Thomas and even Eleanor, who had looked up from her book to witness her little brother's triumph. "Mama, Papa, did you see?" William called excitedly. "I did it, we saw," Virgil called back, his heart full. "Well done, son." Later that night, after the children were asleep and the house had settled into its nighttime quiet, Virgil and Penelope lay in the bed they had shared for a decade, her head on his chest, his arm around her shoulders. "The bedroom is more comfortable than the hayloft, isn't it?" Virgil murmured drowsily, repeating the words he'd spoken on that fateful night. Penelope smiled against his skin. "Much more comfortable," she agreed, "and much more like home." "It is home," Virgil said, kissing the top of her head. "You made it one. We made it one," she corrected gently. "Together." "Together," he echoed, the word both a promise fulfilled and one continuously renewed. Outside, the Wyoming wind whispered across the plains, carrying the scents of sage and summer grass. Inside, sheltered by walls that had witnessed both hardship and joy, Virgil and Penelope Morrison slept in each other's arms, their love a testament to the unexpected paths that lead two solitary souls to find in each other the home they had always sought.